And thanks again for everyone taking the time out of their Tuesday night for being on this chapter training call focused on building a state campaign. Imagine most people on this call, this is not your first call, but I'll introduce myself anyway. My name is Azor Cole. I'm the Deputy Political Director in American Promise. Before I was a Citizen Empowerment Coordinator, and we're joined by Marnie Walsh as well here. Fantastic Citizen Empowerment Coordinator who you all know. And we've purposefully made this meeting tonight a Zoom meeting rather than a Zoom webinar because there's going to be multiple times that we'll open it up for Q&A and for sort of an open conversation. And we're also recording this to use for future trainings to show to chapter members who weren't able to be here and to have it hopefully be a lasting resource down the road. As you all know, American Promise has one goal, and that's to ratify an amendment to the US Constitution to restore American democracy in which we, the people, not big money, not corporations, not unions, not special interest, govern ourselves by July 4th, 2026. We know this amendment can't be won in DC boardrooms with closed door handshakes, but it must be won state by state, person by person across the country. And that to do this, American Promise provides an ongoing structure of support meant to empower you to advance this amendment forward meaningfully where you live. This training tonight is one piece of that structure of support, and tonight it's focused on building a state campaign. We know that winning a constitutional limit is an enormous goal of historic proportions, but that it can be broken down strategically into smaller pieces. And so far in our series of Ready to Ratify trainings, we've talked about effective research and analysis tactics, and we've talked about effective networking strategies. And this third training really gets at the question, so now what? Before we get into it, as we have in these previous two calls, let's just again remind ourselves why we're working on this in the first place. And I'd love for a brave volunteer to share where they're from and what is it that motivates you to be on this call tonight? Why do you care about something like a constitutional amendment to get big money out of politics? So if there's someone who wants to get everyone else off the hook, feel free just to go ahead. Otherwise, we'll just wait here. I see Nancy raising her hand. Thank you, Nancy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nancy from Virginia. And the reason why I care is I worked for the United Nations for 20 years on economic development overseas. My last posting was in Tunisia, where they had the Arab Spring, and they really did everything they could in terms of good democracy, developing a transparent constitution. And then when I came back, I was just horrified to see what has happened to my country in terms of good governance. So I started off, I advocated for results on poverty, but like everybody else, I realized everything I care about, whether it's climate change or prescription drugs or our dysfunctional health system, it's all based on money and politics. And that's why I was so glad to find American Promise and the wonderful, and Azor, the wonderful staff, and all of the leaders around the country, where I think, we come together once a week on Tuesday, and we build each other up. It's really a remarkable group.
Super. Thank you for sharing, Nancy. We'll clip that 30 seconds in the recording afterwards as well. Well said. Is there anyone else who'd like to share why you're on this call and where you're calling in from? Yeah, thank you, Joan. Thank you. I'll help to unmute yourself.
I became an activist a few years ago after the election, when all of a sudden I woke up to the fact that democracy is not a self-running machine. And now it was running in bumpy and not functioning the way it should. And for it to function the way it should, we have to do something. I cannot sit and wait for something magical to happen. And that a lot of the reason that it's so bumpy and that legislators aren't talking to each other and aren't listening to the people has to do with money as the underpinning issue. It's just become so toxic. And if I don't do anything about it myself, if I don't put myself out there and try to do something, that's, I can't complain.
Yeah, no, it's one thing to complain if you're not doing anything. It's another thing to, if you're doing something, you can say, this is actually hard, but I'm trying to figure out how to do it and how to succeed. And there's a huge difference in that. I think we've got time for maybe one more person if someone wanted to follow these two great lead-ins. Yeah, sure, Hank, thanks.
My feelings are very similar to the two folks that preceded me. Between looking at the escalating polarization of income in our country and what it's doing to our sense of community. In late 17, I found I just couldn't sit by anymore. The outrageous things that our government was doing to appease financial interests were such that it was very clear we were rapidly becoming, we at the moment, are still trying to become an oligarchy, not a democracy. And given what selfishness was doing to the greater good, I couldn't sit by and watch it anymore. I had to do something.
Great. Thank you, Hank. I remember those first conversations that me and you were having when you were just getting involved in Lansing, Michigan. I'd walk to my apartment from the T station and talk to this fired up guy in Michigan about why this is something we had to do. Well, thank you all for sharing, and it's always helpful and important to hear our personal stories and to practice telling them. And it's just such a powerful way to engage new people in this work and remind ourselves why we're doing this in the first place. And as we get right into it, just as a reminder, in January, we talked about effective research and analysis on this type of Ready to Ratify training call. And we did a deep dive into a congressperson. The example we used was Rob Portman, a Republican Ohio senator. And we identified a couple of things that were important to him. Combating the opioid crisis and preserving our great outdoors were two things that stood out as meaningful to him on his congressional website. Then last month, we stayed with this example and we practiced actually doing some strategic networking with known influential groups to Senator Portman, which we found based on our research. If you'll recall, we were on his congressional website. We saw, okay, he says that preserving the health of Lake Erie is something that's important. And we can actually see at this second layer of detail, if we click on one of the links on his website, that he was given an award by some conservation organization in the area. And we practiced actively reaching out to that organization to learn more about what they do and to give them hopefully a chance to learn more about what we're doing at some conversation later on down the road. This month, taking one step back, we're asking ourselves, why are we reaching, or why are we researching this member of Congress? And why are we strategically networking with known influencers of theirs? Why are we doing those things? Feel free to shout it out if you've got a guess. We're not going to overthink this question.
Because we have to change, we have to build champions and build relationships that will become champions one person at a time. Sometimes in groups, but basically within that, it's one person at a time.
That's exactly right. We want their vote. If it's a member of Congress who isn't yet publicly supporting this amendment, we want to get them to that point where they are publicly supporting this amendment. There's nothing other than that. We want their vote on this amendment. And we could say to ourselves, well, after enough time, they'll come around. We'll continue with our letters to the editor. We'll have legislative meetings, twice a year, and our outreach meetings to their constituents to join our effort will continue in perpetuity. And this might be true. That might be enough. But tonight, what we're working on is really to sharpen this thinking into a real strategy. And I imagine there's some people on this call who have made campaign plans before, or maybe been part of a campaign. And I'm curious if there's someone who wants to share one aspect of what they think goes into having an effective campaign. I'd love to hear some quick answers to, components of effective campaigns. Is there anyone who has an idea or two?
Good message, effective
good message. Yep, absolutely. Effective message. Anyone else?
Even basic awareness and a critical mass of the people you need to vote, the number that you need to vote.
Message, critical mass, you've got to have some basically political power. If it's a great message, but no one thinks that you've got any sway over, how the election might go, it's harder to have your end outcome realized. Anyone else? One thing that's critical is having a clear goal that's time bound and specific. It's a big piece, and the clear message and some political power. We've touched on that. Want to have a clear head about which strategies we think will work, what the specific tactics are at our disposal, and how we might map them out on a timeline. And then lastly, what goes into an effective campaign, probably a front-loading research and getting a real good sense of, if our goal is to say win the vote of one member of Congress, we want to know a lot about this member of Congress, everything from the demographics of their district to who we think their influential people are, their staff, certainly on one hand, but with layers of research, we might find others who we think would be really impactful on bringing them on board. So we're going to move on and really try to answer this first question, which will set us in motion here, which is, what is our campaign goal? And broadly, as an organization as a whole, we're trying to advance a constitutional amendment to get big money out of politics. And more specifically, we're trying to pass a bill out of Congress by 2024 and have it approved by 38 state legislatures by 2026. And so we can say, well, where do we stand in Congress now? And we can make an assumption based on experience in the last Congress that all of the Democrats in Congress support the kind of amendment that we're working on. And in the last Congress, this was reflected in every single Democrat supporting HJR 2 in the House and SJR 51 in the Senate. We can make another assumption, and that's that a successful campaign of ours will be one that's able to bring Republican votes in Congress. Right now, John Katko in upstate New York is the one Republican in the House publicly on board any amendment resolution. This Congress, it's House Joint Resolution 1. And for the purposes of this conversation tonight, I'm going to strongly recommend that we think through our campaigns and center them around winning the vote of one member of Congress in our state who is not currently supportive of the amendment, and that we treat the 2022 midterm elections as the end point for our campaign. So if we stick with our example of Rob Portman in Ohio, just to stick with the example we've been using, we might say, and I'll put this in the chat here, so I can send to everyone. We might say that our campaign goal is to win the support for our amendment from Senator Rob Portman by November 8th, 2022. And if you're in New Mexico, you might say, for example, our campaign goal is to win the support of Representative Yvette Harrell by November 8th, 2022, the one Republican in New Mexico who's not yet supportive of this amendment. Deciding on this person, and I see a hand or two up, and we'll have questions in just a second, but deciding on who this person to center your campaign goal around might be easy, depending on what state you're in, or you might want to think about it for a while. Some states are certainly more complicated than others, and myself and the political department are a resource for each chapter in making these types of decisions. And we don't have to get into the specifics of each state on this call right now, but let's quickly check in. And I see Joan has her hand up, but I'd love to hear if folks have questions or comments on what we've talked about so far. Yeah, Joan.
Okay. Well, as I was raising my hand, and New Jersey, I don't know offhand because I don't have a fantastic memory like Marie. I don't recall, I don't know if someone would jump out at me to, go ahead, say, Marie.
Two Republicans, it's Van Drew or Chris Smith. And since
Yeah.
Van Drew signed a candidate pledge, he'd probably be the one we would want to think about trying to.
Okay. I guess, and that's fine but that's fine. If we, supposing, just for the sake of argument, that New Jersey had all Democratic, all supporters, we didn't even have two that we had to now go after, would there be another goal? In other words, I'm just kind of speculating. Should we, you know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying.
Let's say we succeed at that and we want to try something else. And, are we just going to really just focus on one person for 2022? Would that cut across all states as a logical goal? Because that simplifies things a lot, in terms of I realize there's a lot to build up to that, in terms of having community support and education that would help to draw that person to see the groundswell of support, et cetera. But
yeah, so we're using that as our goal for the purpose of this meeting. It's a clean example. I think it's a good thing. It's a good starting campaign goal to consider for every statewide chapter. It would be a huge national breakthrough if one more Republican member of Congress, by 2022 comes on board, and, better yet, multiple. Hypothetically, Joan, to your question, if every single member of New Jersey's congressional delegation was supportive of this amendment, would the question be, well, should we not do any, strategic campaigin?
Well, I guess
no, but we change the end goal and say, we change the end goal to say, by November 8th, 2022, maybe we'd still have an end date. We'd like one of New Jersey's congressional delegation to bring someone who's not supportive from another state on board, for example. But you could certainly take the strategies that we'll be talking about in this training and still have them be directly applicable to whatever your end goal was.
I get it.
Super. I see Vicky has her hand up. You need to unmute yourself, Vicky.
And of course, the dog started barking right now. In Minnesota, it's very possible we're going to lose a congressional delegation or congressional district. So, I know you've done the research. Would you help me choose which one? I've got 4 Republicans, and Stauber is one that I would think I would go after just because I think he would be most reasonable. But I should probably choose a second one in case, in case we only end up with 7 districts instead of 8 in 2022.
Yeah, I think it's probably a good idea to head to your bed, and we can connect offline in a lot more detail about the specific politics of Minnesota's congressional delegation. But there will be, I think, a really interesting sort of set of considerations for each chapter to make, and this is sort of squarely in the real importance of deeply researching your state and starting with your members of Congress, understanding, okay, well, these ones are supportive, these ones aren't. That first training we did on research and analysis, I think, will be a useful resource. And I see Joan has her hand up again, so you might have to unmute yourself, Joan.
I just want to say very briefly, where I'm at right now is that I'm spearheading the research effort, which we've been working on since the initial training, and we've been doing some research. And tomorrow, our little subcommittee's having a meeting. And so my focus here is to pull out from this meeting what should be the next steps for us tomorrow. We were putting together the document and all that other stuff. And so I'm trying to, that's what's in my mind from now till 8:30 tonight. So I just kind of wanted to give you a perspective of where we're at in New Jersey.
Super.
We've done some of the research, and now I'm trying to think what's the best use of our time, with the research that we have or are going to get.
Yeah, and quickly, Joan, I would say really key in on Jeff Van Drew and Chris Smith as the two priorities in New Jersey. I see Hank has his hand up here.
Yeah, I got a question. Michigan, to me,
I'm in a meeting until 8.
Oh, okay. And I think I saw Ken Paris is on, so it'd be interesting to hear Ken's reaction to what I'm going to say. Choosing Republican members of our congressional district is an interesting kind of challenge because one, now this is Hank's opinion, okay? Jack Birdman's gone off the deep end in Trump land. I think that's kind of hopeless, but again, I'm open to hearing what Ken feels about that. In terms of people you would normally go to, Peter Meyer, I think at this point he gave more than a pint of blood when he voted to impeach. And the same problem applies to some degree, Fred Upton. So in some ways, someone who doesn't have a risk in that sense is probably Bill Huizenga from Holland. And Holland, as a community, I happen to have done some contract work there.
And Hank, I'll just cut it because this is the exact right way to think about this, but we're not going to have time to go through everybody's state on this call, and we can connect offline in a conversation with Marnie as well. But it's the exact right way to be thinking through who's the highest impact of where we really could be spending our time, what's most likely to succeed, and we'll keep going here. But, in setting a campaign goal, whatever it might be, again, for the purpose of this conversation, we'll say our goal is to win Congressman X their vote by November 8th, 2022, the midterms. And we have a goal. It's specific, it's time-bound, it's based on research. And now we can start to map out specific tactics on a timeline. And we're going to do another brainstorm of what some of these tactics could be. And, what's a tactic? Well, a tactic is, something that you do. It's something that you do to achieve an outcome. A tactic is writing a letter to the editor. You write a letter to the editor to spread awareness of our issue. When someone reads the letter to the editor, they learn about our issue and how they can get involved, or, what current event made you think of the relation between that current event and our amendment. So letter to the editor is one tactic that everyone on this call is familiar with, but what are some other ones? These are things that we do all the time, and you can just shout them out.
Well, you could have, if you're focusing on a specific congressional district, you could go and have events there that draw the public in and invite the legislator to the events, or afterwards write, depending on how the event goes, use that as a vehicle through which to contact the legislator and ask for a meeting, that type of thing. So I guess what I'm saying is meet with have group events with constituents to try to build support there and see how that works.
Absolutely. You linked a couple together there. You said, host an event. You said actively reach out to their constituents. You sort of combine the two in a smart way. You said, invite your legislator to an event, have a meeting with an elected official. All relevant tactics, all things that we can strategically map out into a coordinated plan. Anyone else want to shout out one or two tactics that we can use?
Identify an influencer. In Virginia, we're working with Loris and John Putner in terms of making inroads with Republicans because of the language issue, and they have linkages. So I think it's really important to identify those people who are key influencers have links with conservatives.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Have meetings with the elected official you're trying to win their vote, but also have meetings with the people who you think might be able to help you get the vote of your elected official. I'll list out a couple more and we'll keep going, but, op-eds, having an active social media presence, editorials, candidate pledges are a tactic, constituent calls to elected officials' office, constituent letters, events with partner organizations. To Joan's point, it's helpful to have events with constituents in the absence of, say planning a whole Zoom event or having an in-person event. Friend banking, that's a way to broaden your group, and you can say, well, I'm going to think if I have people that I know in this specific part of the state, if that's where the congressional district, for example, is that you're focused on. So then the question is, well, we've got this big list of tactics, and for the most part, these are things that we do all of the time. But how do we strategically map these out around our campaign goal that we've laid out? And the better your research is, the sharper your plan will be. And it might very well be that you map things out on a timeline and then only find yourself, changing it weeks or days or months later. And that's totally fine, but it is helpful to have, a rough plan that you work backwards from what success looks like. So I'm going to put in the chat here just an example of what this could look like. And I've put a link to this example document in the American Promise resource library. You'd see a link for example campaign plan here. And we're going to talk through it here. So if you're at your computer, which I imagine most people are, you can click on that link in the chat. Raise your hand if it's not working for you, but I think it should be accessible to everyone. And the point here isn't to say, well, this is how your campaign plan for your chapter has to look, or these are the only things that you can plan on doing. But the point is really to say that we're actually already familiar with all these different types of tactics that we just described. Marnie and Dr. Jessica and people on this call are leading training specifically around most of them. But what we might not be familiar with, or what we certainly haven't spent much time talking through in specifics to this point, is interweaving these into a long-term plan around a specific goal. And that's really what we're doing on this call. So if you're looking at this document, and I've got it pulled up on my screen here, we'll see we've got our campaign goal in the upper left-hand corner. And you know, there's always a lot of unknowns in creating political campaigns. We're trying to shape the future, and there's no guarantee of success, and there's a lot of moving pieces, and we certainly always want to jump on opportunities that, you know, might arise down the road that we can't fully plan for. But it's always helpful, for me at least, to start by mapping at the very minimum what we know in terms of known current events. And that can really help give some shape to the plan that we build around it. So you'll see here just a really, you know, simple bare bones example as we're looking in row 5 here. We've got all the way at the end, November 8th, 2022. This is election day. This is where we're working backwards from. And we know that April 28th, 2022 is the primary. Now, this was an example for Ohio. States have different primary dates, so that won't be accurate for most places, but having a primary date mapped onto your plan is a good idea. And then we can say, okay, well, citizen lobby days are coming up in May 2021. You know, this is a chance that if we want to have, say, like a specific goal around number of times that we meet with our elected official, well, here's a good place that we could build the first meeting, for example, into this plan. On the left-hand side, and I'll talk for just 2 or 3 more minutes, then we'll take a break, hear people's immediate thoughts, and then we'll keep talking through this. But on the left-hand side is where it's helpful to have some specific sub-goals. And, you know, this first one is an information goal, and we're working to identify 5 key in-district individuals or organizations who, to Nancy's point, we think might be influential to Congressperson X. And Joan, for example, at the meeting that you have with your research team tomorrow, you might come away from that meeting with a specific metric specific to who you decide to focus your campaign on, that ultimately leads to something like a number, as we're talking about here. We've got a strategic network goal, and we're demonstrating support from specific organizations who we know are influential to Congressperson X. So we haven't only identified them, but now we've built a relationship and demonstrated support from these organizations or individuals. We've got a legislative meeting goal where we'd like to have, in this roughly 2-year stretch, 4 meetings with the person that we're targeting in Congress. But we also want to have 5 meetings with elected officials who we think might be influential to them. You know, this could be a retired member of Congress. It could be one of their active colleagues. It could be state representative in their district. You know, there's no right answer to this, but again, your research will really feed into who these people are that you would think, well, it would be smart to reach out strategically to these people based on this information. And we'll go down and you'll see, okay, well, we've got letter to the editor metrics, and, you know, we say, well, we want them to cover a couple different newspapers, and, you know, it'd be good to have a number of op-eds and a number of newspapers. And, you know, to make this all hum and grow momentum, well, we'll want to be growing our group. And so maybe we should have explicit in our goals a chapter growth goal, where we want to, in this example, say double the number of constituents who are active in the chapter. And so before getting into sort of the center of this example, where we have example sort of, okay, in June, this is what we're planning to do, and we can sort of talk through why. I do want to hear from people on if this roughly makes sense, if it seems like it fits into how you could see your group making a plan, or if there are things that you want to talk through. I see Joan has her hand up here. So Joan, what's on your mind? And you might have to unmute yourself there.
I get some of it. What's a little confusing to me is what is the column? How does the column known current events and B fit into this? And then you've got under information and goals, identify 5 key in-district individuals, blah, 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 blah. And then it's March, April, May, June research. I'm not quite sure what you're trying to say with those cells there.
Yeah, two great questions. And, your first one is chalk that up into me not being the, Excel or Google Sheets expert that one day I will become. But this known current events, you're looking at B5. That's really just referencing that in May, we know May 4th, 5th, and 6th are American Promises Citizen Lobby Days. And if you scroll over, we know that April 28th, 2022 is the Ohio the Ohio congressional primary. To your second question,
right.
to your second question, Joan, this information goal and why is March, April, May, and June blocked off here for research? You could say plan on having, active research all throughout your, 2-year plan. But really what this is demonstrating is, front loading the research is really going to help you towards the beginning of your campaign window, where we'll be learning things throughout, but in general, it's good to sort of think of like the cadence of activities, and you're probably not going to dive right in to your very first thing being, have a strategic op-ed placed from an influential organization that is directly tied to your congressional target, because you probably don't know who that organization is yet, and you probably haven't started a relationship with them, which takes some time. So that's why research in this example is really emphasized at the start of a long plan like this.
Okay, so you're not. Let me just say one thing, and then I'll shut up. So you're not saying necessarily that research across that role has only to do with row 5, identify. I mean, that's important. I get it, but I'm saying that's the part that I find.
Great distinction. Yeah, the research isn't only focused on identifying 5 in-district individuals or organizations who you think are influential to this congressperson. That's certainly a big part of it, but research is a really broad topic, and that's a great distinction. I see Monica has her hand up. Yeah, thanks, Monica.
Yeah, I have a really basic question here. Are you saying that this template is just, an example of something that you could do, or this is the template that we all should be using?
The former. This is an example of how you might choose to lay this out for your chapter. But, a really bad strategy would be Azor create a generic template and tell everyone to do that exact template. The states are really going to vary. And, I hope that parts of this are helpful for your chapter. But, this is just to, be technically specific. In the resource library, you'll find this document. If it's helpful to do right now, I think you can go to File, make a copy, and you could start with this and, delete it all and build it back up, or delete parts of it, or keep all of it. It's to use however you think would be helpful for you or your group. Anyone else? I see Hank in the chat says, I like how you're mapping out this kind of plan. Hank, as a project manager, I've seen some of your spreadsheets before. I'm glad you appreciate the Excel sheet or Google Sheets. I see Beverly Hill has her hand up. So Beverly, please go ahead. And you might have to unmute yourself there.
There. thank you for the training. This is helpful. I live in North Texas, and obviously our state legislature just tilts red in a very big way. One thing that we're finding is there are moderate Republicans in both houses who are sympathetic to the amendment, but they're afraid of, real pushback from our governor. If they came out in favor of it, he would, at least in our state, he can transfer money from his own campaign coffers to anyone else. And he would make sure that they lost their primaries. He has a war chest of $47 million right now, and this is not even a campaign year for him. So what we're finding is that there are Republicans who support this and have tried to launch other ethics in government initiatives and failed. And no one wants to be the first one to step out. No one wants to be the one to lay his or her head on the block and be just massacred politically. So we're thinking that we need to identify several and get them talking to each other. And our immediate goal is to get a resolution passed in the state legislature calling on Congress to pass this 28th Amendment. 22 states have done that now. We'd like to be the 23rd. I mean, that's very ambitious in Texas, but so we are trying to build up a critical mass of Republicans who support this, who can vote for it. They won't co-author it. They can't, but they might vote for it if they're sure that their colleagues will.
Yeah, what you're describing is a very real dynamic. The political reality is it is hard to be, breaking with the majority or, leadership or, a powerful governor of the same party on a new issue. And that a big way to, lessen that hardship is to, as an advocate, do the even harder work, but necessary work of coordinating with multiple people at the same time to help people come on as a group, not one at a time. And, having active constituents in these people's districts who they think really will vote for them if they see their state representative, in this case, taking a strong stand on an issue like this. It's a hard question. Is there anyone on this call who's got insights or, not disillusioned by the challenge here, but what are some ways we can be thinking about how to solve this problem? Yeah, Hank.
I think you hit probably the key thing, and that is there's got to be something under the people that you want to. I think first of all, the idea of getting more than one very supportive rep together and get them to understand themselves as a group of people is very important. And then you've got to have fire under them. They've got to believe that their constituents believe in the matter enough. And then, Azor, I think you brought up a really good point that I never thought about before. And if you can get some of the people who are asking their representative to step out a bit, to commit to being a significant party in their reelection campaign, that's going to help call forward their friends, neighbors, and so forth, and that the rep knows that there will be response when he or she needs it come primary time. That's a combination that I think could work, but you got to be prepared to do 60 hours a week
And I see Heather has her hand up here. So Heather, go ahead.
Well, it seems that a lot of the Republicans that step out there seem to be two types right now. Ones that are in very safe districts who don't worry about primary challenges. And the others are the ones who aren't running for reelection. And there are a number who aren't running for reelection who maybe you could win over on side because they don't have to worry about being primaried. And maybe they stepping out could encourage others to take cover from them.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that question up, Barb, because it is, or Beverly, excuse me, it is, at the state level in Congress, it's the question that we're trying to answer, so we can have, support for our issue be solely based on, if someone actually agrees with it, and not based on if someone might agree with it, but be worried that, our political power is less than the political power they're going to lose from any retribution that they might face for, not doing what, say, their party leadership wants, or special interest groups who have a vested interest in keeping this system as is want. Vicki, do you have your hand up here?
Yeah, I was wondering, I don't know if it was a couple years ago where we kind of started to take a hard line saying, if they won't support, vote them out. Where are we on that now? I mean, I know it's important to get Republicans on board, but, and I know that, but I'm starting to think that some of them just need to go.
Yeah, it's case by case, certainly. There are tons of groups that are overtly partisan groups, and in this case, Democratic groups, and they work to flip red seats blue. I'm of the mind that from American Promises perspective, we make sure that we don't leave any stone unturned before going, full speed ahead that route. But it's a good question, and that's certainly, an option that is always there. And then it's a question of, well, if you try to do that, are you going to be the tipping point that makes it happen, or is it going to, forever tarnish that relationship? So it's an interesting, calculated political question. I see Monica has her hand up here.
Well, it's just sort of in response to Vicki's comment. I mean, it just feels that things have become so toxically partisan, all up and down, even to the people. But either way, if you're going to try to vote them out, or if you're going to try to get enough, if you're going to try to get them to move, it seems that the way to do it is to get the people, get their constituents, get enough of their constituents to be making calls and writing letters, and and that's, it just seems that that's like the only thing. And that, even that is a little bit, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, no offense to any Debbies, but even that seems to have become more and more entrenched and more, partisan, speaking to, constituents, and they seem to be latching on to the rhetoric and pushing back on things that you would think they should support. But, I guess the only point is that, to me, either way you do it, it seems that the thing you have to do is get their constituents.
Yeah, and Augie's in the chat here brought it up twice, just the paramount importance of that exact point. Your elected officials care really about what their constituents think, and whether it's having an event in their district or friend banking or, purposefully writing letters to the editor to newspapers that we know are, read predominantly by people in this part of the state. These are all things that are really helpful to have in the back of our mind as we map these different tactics out on a timeline. So looking back at this example, we'll talk through just a couple of these, sort of tactics strategically. If we say for a chapter growth goal in this case, well, we want to double the number of constituents active in our chapter. And really simply, okay, if we do say friend banking in June and we have however many it is, 10 chapter members or 5 chapter members, talk to 5 friends or, maybe 2 friends each in this particular congressional district. Well, let's just plan on having an informational chapter meeting specifically for new people the next month or, the next week in June, wherever it might be. But you can see how friend banking then leads to a chapter meeting specifically for new people. And all of a sudden, the numbers of people in our group who want to write letters to the editor or participate in legislative meetings is going up. That's one very simple example of how this timeline works. Here's another example of, okay, we know May 4th, May 5th, and May 6th, American Promise is working to have citizen lobby days. So we can say, okay, well, let's have that be our first meeting with our main congressional target. And, maybe ahead of lobby day, let's write a letter to the editor and make sure it's placed in a newspaper that is in their congressional district. And that might be something that we can, one, get on their radar ahead of time. It's common for member of Congress's offices to have Google alerts set up for their name or, various keywords in their district. And, it's likely they'll see it or it'll be put in a memo compiled by some research associate ahead of time. It's also a great thing to bring to a meeting with an elected official. And, similarly, after meeting with an elected official, you might say, okay, well, now we've got some additional information on something that's letter to the editor worthy. We say there's a newspaper article about outside money that was spent in the last congressional cycle. I'm making this up, but your letter to the editor might be, I read this article and I see this as a problem directly linked to our inability to meaningfully limit money spent in elections. My chapter at American Promise just met with Congressperson so-and-so and are working around the permanent solution of a constitutional amendment and hope you'll join us. We can stagger, letters to the editor being planned again anytime after you meet with an elected official as well. Similarly, if we're looking at our legislative meeting goal, we might say that, okay, in September, we think that our research has probably got us to the place where we've got a pretty decent idea of an additional elected official who might be influential to our main elected official. Let's aim to have a meeting, our first meeting with an additional elected official who we think will be influential to our main target. And let's aim to then the next month have our second meeting with our main elected official. And if that meeting with our influential elected official goes well, we could, one, tell our main elected official about that, maybe even invite that person to attend this meeting. But you can see how we could really think, well, how does putting one of these tactics on our calendar allow us to do another one even more effectively, or open up this door that might seem closed if we weren't thinking about it in relation to the friend banking we're doing or the letter to the editor that we just published. Got a couple minutes here, and I've really gone through most of what I want to talk through, but I'm curious for any immediate thoughts on, or this process of mapping these tactics out on a timeline.
I have a question, Azor. One of the things that in attending in preparation for some of the meetings we're going to be doing down the line with Sam about building champions, he, in fielding questions about what the next step for CCL, what next step to take with a legislator, was asking, okay, well, how many meetings have you had with the legislator, which certainly goes along this. But he talked about, how many have you delivered letters from constituents? And what they do is they collect, in fact, Ann Drum as CCL member and was talking about this today on our coffee and chat, that they have people fill out a form basically that they can then generate and pay, rather than email it to them, have it so that they actually have a stack of letters to hand over to the staffer from constituents when they go for their lobby day meeting. And I was wondering if, maybe that's something we couldn't build out on the American Promise site, so that we can have not only the names of, X number of people in New Jersey are on our database and this many in your district are in our database, and here are letters. And I think Nancy used Action Network to do some things like that in Virginia. But then again, that's, got a connotation in terms of a progressive side, and that probably isn't good to be bringing to Republican legislators.
Yeah, but to your point, Maria, that's absolutely a great thing to be showing any elected official. These are your constituents who we've asked, and they've told us that they care about this issue and want your support on it. And you might say, well, for our state's plan, we're going to put a specific goal to how many of these constituent letters we want, and we're going to deliver it in this month. I think that would be a really smart improvement to this example here. I saw Laura had her hand up. Laura, do you still have a question or comment here?
Well, I was just going to say that I think I'm feeling like the 2022 election is really close already. And because I have so many Republican districts, which are pretty far from where I live, what I'm doing right now is I'm using my personal network to explain to folks which congressional districts I'm interested in, and asking them if they have friends in those areas that might want to attend our lobby day. And that hasn't turned into anything concrete so far, but I've just started it. And I think I actually have 2 or 3 really solid leads. And these are completely Republican districts. So having a constituent or 2 or 3 and particularly Republican constituents is going to be great. I'm kind of explaining that they can use this civics training, they can use really for advocating for any purpose. I mean, it's so valuable to have a set of 3 sessions of setting up a meeting, working together as a team, talking through all the planning we always talk about.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Got to turn up some people.
Yeah, and the example that we used tonight doesn't have to be, say, the end goal for what you decide makes most sense for where you are in California, with it being focused around the midterms. I would really recommend strongly thinking about that as the end goal, but it doesn't have to be. And you might say, well, we're zooming our thinking out further than that. But we'll keep going here and end this call on time. And again, we'll send the recording of this around in a recap email tomorrow. Send a link in the resource library to where this example is, but it should be it's on about the 3rd page down, and it says campaign plan example, which you'll be able to see anytime you access the resource library. And next month, our focus of this training will be on actually rolling out your campaign. And it's really an extension of the last 20 minutes of this conversation, but we'll talk through a couple of things more in depth. And this we'll hear from folks how you're organizing your chapter into small teams already, and then we'll brainstorm how we might continue to organize our chapters into small teams to execute a plan like this. You know, the 4 trainings that are currently being led by Marnie and Dr. Jessica in the empowerment department with the help of some on this call, friend banking, writing letters to the editor, planning and hosting events, social media. These teams actually give us a really great start on how to break this down. And we'll also talk about how to effectively bring people in that we're strategically networking with. You know, they might not see themselves as chapter members, and we might have a limited amount of their time. So we'll talk about the best practices for ways to bring in, say, like, you know, high up business executives, or, you know, Rotary Club presidents, or, you know, editorial editors at a newspaper that you think are, well, these are key people. We'll talk about best practices for joint Zoom events, which are an effective way to do this sometimes. And really broadly, just how to turn one point of engagement into multiple. So I hope these trainings are coming together so far and are making sense in the context of the work everyone's doing already so well. This next training that I'm talking about on rolling out your campaign will be April 6th. The first Tuesday of the month is what we're shooting for on these. And ahead of time, please don't hesitate to let me know if there are particular points that you want to make sure we cover during this. And we will. So that's all for tonight, you guys. And thanks for taking the time. And sorry for going 3 minutes over, but we went 3 minutes over. We started 3 minutes late, so that's why we start on time.
Thanks,
you guys.
Azor.
Thank
All
you.
right,
Hey, everybody.
Thank you guys. Good night.
Bye,
Thanks.
guys.
Good night.